Hey guys, it's Chris Truitt from the Reluctant Somm. We're really excited about season 3. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Just wanted to give another little note that if you like what we're doing and you want to show us some support, reviews, likes, shares, word of mouth, all of these things really help us. We'll also be creating a newsletter this year that focuses on some of our favorite restaurants, favorite wine lists, favorite places to eat, as well as just some really cool people in the industry, as well as some other insights into what's going on in our field of profession. I also wanted to let you know that on that is where we'll be updating everybody on all of our pop-ups and any collaboration events or anything that we're doing. So if you want to keep track of us, that's the best way. Also, if you're not already following us on Instagram, you can follow us at Reluctant Somm on Instagram and keep up with us. Give us likes. Cheers.
Cheers.
Claire, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm very excited to have you here. I think that, the first time that I ever heard of you through and obviously the winery as well, I was working in Texas, and Randall Pettit, who is a close friend of Silas Rushton's, mentioned you and Alan and kind of your role and how you've stepped into the role at the winery. And I remember being like excited because, it's a second generation American winery, and there's not a ton, and third generation, there's not a ton. And so, it's great to see that. And obviously, the historic legacy of your father and kind of seeing the evolution of that as well is something that I think has been really exciting. And then had the honor of selling Ramey Wines for 3 years at Chambers and Chambers.
Thank you, sir.
And, to me, it was always really cool. But one of the things that I think was the most fun was putting it in a bag and just pouring it for people and like not telling them what it is or not making a big deal out of it. Mm-hmm. Because, the style of the winery, in my recollection at least, it has changed a lot. And so, a lot of times I think it was a great way to kind of like not check like a somm or a buyer, but to kind of like bring them out of their box a little bit and go like, oh wow, this is way different than I remember it. And I was like,
yeah, I mean, we've been around since '96,
things can change.
Things do change.
Yeah. And I think that's so cool because, I'm not saying that like a lot of wineries are, stay the same way for a long time, but it's really awesome to see the way that you guys have evolved and continue to evolve, and you're, constantly adapting to the struggles of all the things that we struggle with nowadays.
Always struggles.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think part of the reason that Alan, my brother, and I wanted to join the family business is because there's always been a sense that it's a dynamic company. We are not set in a recipe or the way we do things. We can always improve. We're always looking to get better. So there's experiments, and our status quo is just like, hey, what else can we try?
I think that's so cool. I love that. It's the person that I had on the podcast last night. We were talking about, the Germans growing something different in Mosel, like trying to grow like Vermentino or trying to grow like something else. Cause
yep.
as the climate is changing, and then he goes, well, they would never do that because it's so against their history. And I said, well, but when all of a sudden, the Netherlands can start making amazing sparkling wine, maybe we'll see some Southern Italian grapes growing there or something.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully, I don't want to say hopefully not to not give them a chance, but hopefully not in my lifetime do we see that vast changes happening. But
you never know.
Holding our breath. So great. So the way that we always start the podcast is to kind of give a little bit of history. So I'd love if you could kind of like, obviously wine ties quite closely with your life. So it's not maybe necessary for you to say where wine came into your life, but I think if you can kind of just like give us some of your background and then bring us up to speed with kind of where you are today.
Yes. So every member of the family is going to tell our history a little differently. That's just the fun of having 4 family members involved. As I mentioned, we started in '96, at which point I was 6 years old. So a conscious, semi-functioning human being, very aware that my parents were beginning a new endeavor that took up a lot of time and resources. Mom worked from home for years before having an office at the winery, and she didn't take a paycheck until a couple years after we hired our first employee. So there was a strong startup energy that infused the household at a very impressionable young age. But even before that, I absolutely knew that my dad made wine. Wine was drunk at dinner every night. It's just something that I remember as far back as memory goes. And as is more typical in Europe, my brother and I got to try wine mixed with water at a younger age, and we'd get a couple sips at the table, and we'd be quizzed a little bit about what we thought about wines from all over the world for a couple decades. So meanwhile, you'd think that I would have thought about joining the winery at some point, but it did not occur to me until after graduating college, partly because my parents did such a good job of drilling into us that we could do whatever we wanted. And I didn't know what I wanted, and I was supposed to do something that I loved, and I was just waiting to see what happened. So got a useless degree, was lured back home with a dilapidated but adorable little farmhouse on the vineyard that my parents had finally purchased at the end of 2012. That's what running a winery looks like when it's built out of cash flow and borrowing early days. You don't get land until you're well established. And then Alan and my then boyfriend and current husband were working a harvest in 2013. And we had an intern that year who was having some, difficulty keeping up with some of the physical work. And so like, well, I didn't get my job at the kombucha bar that I applied for, so I'll give this a shot. And that was a game changer, seeing the business from the inside instead of the, more of the outside for so many years. And I never left.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's fascinating to think that you did kind of take a step away, like versus like after high school, immediately jumping into the business. But I feel like it's amazing that your parents were able to set you up with the mindset of like, you can do whatever you want, because so many times people are set up with this is your legacy. This is what you have to do,
Yeah. Talking to other families, it sounds like that hasn't worked as well for other folks. It's just lucky it worked out this way.
Yeah. Or the classic, European, like, okay, you're going to go to another winery, another region, and make wine there for a couple of years, and then you can come home, and then I'll let you take over the winery.
Yeah, and that's the benefit of being two of us, right?
Yeah.
Alan he's always been very, I don't want to say more ambitious than me, but certainly more out there. So he did a couple harvests abroad in Burgundy and Chile. He's always been interested in study abroad, etc. And I fell in with our longtime VIT consultant, Daniel Roberts, who has a PhD in soil science and has seen it all. I mean, he helped bring drip irrigation to Napa Valley, something we take for granted now. So I enjoyed like literally learning out in the field.
And it was probably much different than, being in college and sitting in a classroom every day and all of a sudden you're in the field.
Certainly different. Yeah. I mean, having a unrelated degree, we did go back and we did the certificate program through Davis. And I must say classroom viticulture and boots in the ground viticulture, it's like the moon and planet Earth.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we see that too, in the restaurant industry. People would go and get their culinary degree or their degree in, hospitality management. And then they like start working in service and they're like, this is insane. And they're like, and you chose this as your career? Like, what's wrong with you? Yeah. And so, one of the things that I really want to ask is if you can kind of highlight the vineyards and the reach that you guys have for all of your access to all of your grapes. It doesn't have to be like a full list, but no. Where were you during that time? Was that the property where you guys own now?
Yes, Westside Farms, which is on Westside Road. We're our immediate neighbors are William Somm and Arista, so not a bad spot to be. But funnily enough, the previous owners also ran a pumpkin patch off of that property. And both my brother and I went there in grade school on field trips. So we like knew this property before we had any idea that we would one day get to own it. Still makes me a little jittery thinking about it. But yeah, site is amazing. Obviously, it is 38 planted acres once we finish our replant projects going on, which is something we've never been used to having. It's been over 10 years now, so I should say we're a little bit used to it now, but it's still kind of a novelty. And people ask me all the time how many other vineyards we work with, and I can never give them a straight answer, even though I manage all those relationships. I can't pick favorites either, but what is amazing, and what makes me excited to work every day, week, month, or season, is the number of differences and similarities between sites that are either right next to each other or a good ways away. Again, using Westside Farms as an example, in those few acres, we can have a 5-degree swing during peak hours during the day, and then it swings back the other way at night. And, we might pick one side of the ranch a week or two ahead of the other side. So the idea that you can judge a site just by looking at where it is on the map and understand everything about it is pretty silly.
Yeah, bogus.
Yes. I'm sorry, that doesn't exactly answer your question.
No, that's fine. No, I think though that it's important, and it's you didn't answer the question, but you highlighted something else it is probably more important. It's the diversity in sites even within the same area. Yeah.
And that is why we feel very strongly it's important to be in all vineyards throughout the whole season, because, we might fall into thinking, oh, it's in a warmer area, it's gonna, race, or, oh, that's a cool spot, we don't need to worry about it. There's a good chance you're totally wrong, unless you're there, every week or every 2 weeks, keeping an eye on things and really keeping your pulse on the vineyard.
Yeah, I feel like, you hear some people say like, oh, that vineyard does this, or I know what it's going to do. And it's great if that's the case, but maybe if you're looking for a little bit more site specific wine, or you're looking for like the perfect character from that vineyard site for the component of the wine, it's probably a lot more sensitive. You don't want to overestimate.
Yeah, or, different blocks or different clones, and they might move totally differently. Maybe one is going to be affected by shatter and is usually heavier but is lighter one year, and if you're not there to keep an eye on it, you don't know.
Infinitely complicated, as wine can always be. Then you go into the realm of winemaking or viticulture, and it just gets even more chaotic, which is cool. I love that. It's very individualistic. And then as far as winemaking style, I think it's great if we can highlight kind of, I don't know if you want to discuss maybe the evolution of the winemaking style and how that's happened, or if you want to just maybe high spot a couple different turning points throughout the career of the history of the winery.
It's kind of interesting to think about. So in general, if you're to look analytically, and we've graphed it from 96 to current release, which is 23 for the appellations and about to be 22 for the single vineyards. We're picking a little bit lower bricks these days. We're using a little bit less new oak, and those are the primary differences. Those changes came about really quite organically. Again, it's a very gradual decrease. I think part of it, there's a practical component. One is, in the early days, Dad was the only guy getting out there and sampling everything. And he was driving all over the place and doing sales and marketing and making the wine with a handful of other backup employees, but he had a lot on his plate, and it's really hard to do all of that and dial in exactly when you're going to bring these things in. So he did a lot on instinct, and of course, historical knowledge, and made good calls. And then also, as he started drinking some more fresh Italian white varieties, I think his palate started changing. And then Alan and I came on board, and we had completely different palates. I inherited pick decisions prior to the harvest of 17. And I didn't set out to radically change our style, but it's just, everyone's a little different. And I called the picks a little bit differently, and keep tweaking them as we, again, seek to improve at each site each year.
And then you were discussing kind of like new oak, but there's also, you have eggs. And we have two concrete egg-shaped fermenters, which we got those in 2012 as well, and those have usually made a small percent of the Russian River or the Sonoma Coast, Fort Ross Seaview blends, but it's just an experiment. I mean, that's why we picked them up, to compare stainless steel drum. We've done tank, but that was a long time ago. Barrel, old barrel, new barrel, concrete, etc., so that we can talk about, like, well, what do we like and why do we like it, and is it scalable, and why is it better? Is it not better? Is it a personal preference? I don't think that we could scrap all of our barrels and get a bunch of eggs. That would not fit. It would be very stark difference, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That was one of the trainings that we had when we came up there. I remember we got a flight of 4 wines, and we're like, okay, they're all Chardonnay, and they were all like kind of different, and you're like, what's the difference? And then realizing that all 4 of them had been fermented differently was really cool, because we talk about all the time, like single vineyard and how a site can affect the way that a grape tastes, or a vintage can affect the way that the grape tastes. And I don't think we pay quite enough attention when, somebody says 50% new oak, 50% stainless. You go like, okay, sure.
Those are impactful decisions.
But they're super impactful. And especially when you're able to, I think, taste them as separate components. I think that's really cool. It's very fascinating.
Yeah. Do you remember what you thought of the egg wine?
Yeah, I think I remember just tasting all of them, and I remember the angular acidity of the wine that was aged in egg. It just felt a little kind of like sharper, but I thought they were all really cool. I thought they were all really interesting to taste, and the acidity was like vastly different in all of them as well, or maybe it wasn't, but maybe it appeared differently because of the fermentation.
Well, and CO2 too, which I think drives how the acidity appears on the palate. I mean, the egg just retains CO2 like nobody's business. If we were to bottle straight out of egg, you have to really watch it at bottling, because otherwise you'll get a solid pop.
Wow. And then the last time that we were there, you guys you had the glass top barrels. And you're doing the
plexiglass.
Yeah, plexiglass. And you're doing the Sir Lee glasses. I was like, that's awesome. It's so cool.
Yeah, because no one knows what it actually looks like. And, it's such a core part of our program. It's nice to literally shine a light on that.
Literally shine a light. Yeah. It's very cool. I have a couple videos. I mean, maybe I'll put them up after this, or we can do a little, a little reel thing on it, because I was recording Mark Curtis doing batonnage on the barrel. So. Yeah, one of the other things that I kind of wanted to touch on was, I don't know, if you could give a history on your dad and kind of like all of the consulting that he did before he opened the winery, because a lot of people know Ramey as Ramey, but I mean, there was a couple decades of consulting.
Yes, absolutely. And the sad thing is, I don't know that I can even name them all, because
there was
I wasn't even conscious that he was doing it at a certain level. But after even before he graduated Davis with his master's of enology, his first real harvest, was at Lambert Bridge in Sonoma County. And then his first real job out of school was at CME, working with Zelma Long, which was very, very formative. He really appreciates what Zelma let him do and collaborate with him on. From Simi, moved on to Chalk Hill. That is really where he started putting native yeast to the test. You know what? I left out Matanzas Creek before Chalk Hill. Yeah. Simi, Matanzas Creek, Chalk Hill, and then Dominus, and then Rudd. And Dominus is where Ramey first happened on the side as a side project, because he had fallen in love with Chardonnay at Chalk Hill. Dominus, of course, doesn't make much Chardonnay.
He wanted something light and refreshing to drink.
No. And he was able to take the Ramey project with him to Rudd. But when our case production started matching theirs, it was time to focus on Ramey full time. And then, consulting, he picked up pretty soon after that. I know he had Lancaster for a bit. More people than I can list.
Many people.
Rodney Strong for a good number of years. That was a long relationship for him. A little bit of work up in Lake County as well. That's how we kind of got to know some cab sites up there and experimented. It's nice to compare that AVA to Napa for Cabernet. And then he kind of slowly started scaling back and taking a little bit of a break after many, many years.
It had to have been, I guess like you mentioned, right? When you're a kid, it doesn't really like put everything into context, but as you get older, you start to realize kind of like all the things that he's doing, all the balls that he was juggling, Yeah,
that was a lot of balls.
Yeah. It's, it's crazy. And speaking of Rudd, correct me if I'm wrong, the Pedregal Vineyard is close to Rudd?
Yeah, it's kind of just up the hill.
Right, okay.
To the east. You can almost see it.
Yeah, almost. And what is, Pedregal is the kind of the crown jewel of production, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it's the only single vineyard Cabernet that we've made really in a couple decades. The site jumped out to Dad when he was looking in 2004. That was our first vintage. That whole area is just, a lot of people say this, it's a great area to grow Cabernet, even though it can get wicked hot, but with properly managed canopy, there's just this magic tension between knock your palate off tannin and finesse and elegance that makes it surprisingly approachable at a young age.
Is that a more challenging site because you need to be kind of on it, or do you think with...
It's a very challenging site because of the 85% rock in the soil, which means the drainage is killer. It's a little bit too good. Dry farming works well at a lot of sites, but not at Pedregal. If you see, upper 90s or 100 coming, you want to give it a little drink, especially if it's early in the season, because otherwise you're going to lose canopy. You're going to get really dehydrated, sad grapes.
Woof. Especially in the area where it gets so hot.
Yeah, but it's really just a factor for a couple weeks, around September. And other than that, pretty smooth sailing.
That's good. And then as far as production goes, I'm sure that there's more things, but kind of the flagship wines are the Chardonnay Russian River, Fort Ross Seaview, which we're having the 2021 vintage here, Claret, Syrah, Pinot Noir.
A lot of little things.
Yeah, a lot of little things. I would love if you could kind of highlight the importance of Syrah to the program, because I think, a lot of people think about production in that region and they go like, if you can make Cabernet Chardonnay, it's all you need. That pays the bills, right? But Syrah is a little bit more of an uphill battle. Even, for wine people, we love Syrah. But, Syrah on a list has a little bit of a challenge with sell-through.
Yes.
And so I think it'd be really cool if you could highlight kind of like why Syrah is such an important part of the winery.
Happy to. I mean, you hit on most of the key points. You're correct. Syrah does not pay for to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
But that's both the upside and downside of being a family-run, relatively small operation, is we get to do some things that don't necessarily make monetary sense, but that we're passionate about. Alan and I remember there was a lot of Rhone that crossed the table, especially when we were young, southern and northern, but the Hermitage, Crozes Hermitage, Côte Rôtie, all of the appellations up there, not so much Cornas because of the lack of co-fermentation, I think. We drank a lot of, and for whatever reason, Dad was particularly passionate, and was pretty gung-ho in the early to mid 2000s about planting Syrah vineyards. He helped plant 3 Syrah vineyards. Wow. Because everyone thought Syrah was going to be the next big thing. 20 years later, it hasn't taken off yet. You'd think with almost every wine professional I've ever met has said that they love Syrah.
Syrah and Riesling.
I think with all the educating power, we could have turned the tide, but no avail. But we've made it because we love making it and we love drinking it. And it's an underrated, undervalued variety. I mean, it's what our employees buy a lot of.
Yeah, it's always been one of my favorite wines that you guys do, and it's amazing to see too the difference in style between the Core Syrah and then the Rogers Creek and Coal Creek now, and to see how kind of drastically different those wines are, while still being like they're still very much like a string that connects all of the wines and all of the winemaking styles. And then also the way that you hold back some of those Syrahs too is kind of, I don't know if it's intentional or if it's not, but it's
mixed bag.
But it's impressive too to be able to release something with a little bit of age. I was in a meeting the other day, and it's a Napa winery, and the big focus for them is like, get all our 22s out there, and it's like, wow, it's just it's so fast.
It's so fast.
Wow. Yeah, and then also too, I mean, you're using a little bit of Syrah in the claret. Is that still the case?
Yeah, it's been traditional. It's always, I mean, I can't say it's always been that way. It wasn't that way until we started purchasing Syrah.
I see. Okay.
So there were a couple early vintages of claret without it, but otherwise, I don't think we've missed a vintage. And yeah, I'm trying to think of how I can qualify Syrah versus other things, and I don't know. We try to be practical by at least not overproducing.
Sure.
But Dad was very much inspired by the Lalas and those really classic, carefully released Syrahs that spend, I believe, 4 years in barrel before even bottling. So there's always been this interest in holding back and letting the wine develop a little bit before it gets into the hands of drinkers. We would really like to do that with the Cabernet as well, which we do a pretty decent job of. But as you said, something has to keep the lights on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if it'd be different again. I mean, maybe in 2 more generations, that could be the business model, right? But
yeah,
tis not the case right now.
I know, and if storage costs could just stay.
Oh
the same,
I'm sure
that would be great.
Yeah.
That fine balance of pragmatism and idealism is it's fun.
yeah. Fun, challenging, dynamic, I think is something that you said at the beginning of the podcast. And I think that's very much like one of the things that connects the wine industry and the hospitality industry. It's all very dynamic, and your role might be this, but you're going to have to do this and you're going to have to do that,
Yeah, but challenging is fun, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. I'd rather go to bed every night exhausted and feel fulfilled than go to bed, with a full tank and kind of like, I wonder if I was doing something different, if I'd be happy,
Well,
yeah.
And dynamic means that you can make a difference if you work at it, which I think is a much nicer feeling than I just have to box widgets all
yeah,
day.
Yeah. I was talking to one of my friends recently, and we were just talking about like video games, and like somebody's whole job is to just like create small items in a video game, and you're like, I don't know if I could do that.
We're grateful somebody
Yeah,
does.
right. Yeah. But I don't know if I could. I don't think that I'm the guy that could sit in an office and just do that all day. I mean, obviously you could probably slam down a bunch of podcasts and like learn a bunch of things kind of passively. But but I guess if they paid me a lot of money, I guess I could figure out a way to do it.
For sure.
One of the things that I also wanted to mention was I don't remember who I was talking to, but I was talking to, maybe I was listening to a podcast. I can't remember where it was, but I think it's one of the things that I always like to mention when I would take Ramey out in the bag, especially the Chardonnay. And it was Pierre-Yves Cullen-Moret mentioning that, working with David Ramey was one of the most impactful moments in his career, and it was really like an eye-opening thing for him. And I think to me that just spoke to, you have people that want to dismiss maybe like classic California producers and go like, oh, the style's not changing or whatever, it is what it is. I know it too well. It's not exciting or something like that. And then meanwhile, they're all going crazy for Pierre-Yves Cullen-Moret. Understandably, the wines are incredible, but to know that like their history is connected, I think is really eye-opening in the sense that like you can learn a lot from people, whether you're making wine in the same country as them or you're not.
For sure. And it speaks well to his character that he was open to listening to a new world producer.
Sure.
He could have come with a closed mind, like he had nothing to learn here, but he chose to be open-minded. And I think the part of Dad that really speaks and captures people who are even skeptical is that he's so open with sharing information, and he always has something to back up to prove why he's doing. And it's hard to argue when you've literally seen the experiment work.
And has he been pretty open, I guess, to most of the changes that you guys want to do? I know that you kind of have committee style-esque, right?
We're more and more roundtable has been the model the past few years. The transition, if you can even call it that, has been, I think, more organic than we even set out for it to be. It's just it's felt almost effortless in many ways. So he has been open-minded, but again, it's not been like a, hey, I'm gonna do this, what do you think about that? It's just been like, hey, it came in a little lower this year, and then we watch it for a year, and it's like, you know what, that's pretty darn good, let's maybe push it even a little further. And it comes down to vineyard site and vintage, and of course, again, not just making a didactic decision like, oh, we picked this vineyard at this point because that's what we did last year. It's going to be a little different.
And how about the single vineyard Chardonnays and the focus on those? I mean, it's so crazy to think like some of the wines that you guys are able to make and some of the vineyard sites that you have access to. Is there kind of like a similar winemaking style that goes into each of them, or are they each kind of handled differently because they're from such different sites?
I think, variety to variety, there is a sense in handling things differently. But for us, for Chardonnay, there's no reason, aside from vintage, maybe one site having a stressor that needs a different pick. Once it's in the winery, it's treated identically, which really means that any differences you're getting in the glass are just vintage and vineyard primarily. I think it makes it more interesting that way. Otherwise, it's a little bit an artifice of winemaking if we were to treat them differently substantially.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And that makes a lot of sense when you say it like that, right? Because it's like, so many times you think about like, I mean, these would effectively be, Grand Cru sites or maybe Premier Cru sites.
Yeah, we think so.
Yeah. It's, and those wines are, fantastic and benchmark and constantly scoring high. And And congratulations on this year's award for Russian River Chardonnay.
Oh, thank you. That was delightful to learn.
Yeah. When do you find out about those? Do they just call you like a week before, or they call you the day of? Or
I think it was minimum the week before. I feel like it was right when it launched.
Yeah.
I mean, it just hit us. We felt a little blindsided. It was delightful, but I mean, half of our sales team was on vacation, and they ended up working on their vacations trying to handle the demand, which is a good problem to have, but a little stressful as well.
Certainly. And since you mentioned the sales team, I think, it goes, I'll give a quick shout out to Silas, who is a great friend of mine in Texas, and we would go to lunch, and there'd be a bottle of claret on the table, maybe a bottle of Chard, and was always a great person and has worked for the company for a long time. And
he has. And
since my time at Chambers, Jeff has been there the entire time and is also a great champion for the wines and the family. What's it like coming back into the family business, right? You were kind of there as a kid, but not really. Coming back into the family business and having kind of people that have been around for so long, was there any kind of like hesitance? Did you feel intimidated? I mean, like, how does it...
That's a good question. Silas predated us joining the company, and Jeff he joined us in 15, a couple years after. So pretty tight. There's pros and cons to having people remember what you were like as a teenager or a youngster. And even, being brought on board new. I think, what Alan and I were always sensitive to is being second generation. Of course, it literally is nepotism, so we have to prove that we're here for a reason.
That you're worth it, yeah.
And of course, we're young, so we're always just aware of people who've been around longer than us, and part of the new dynamic is just making sure that everyone's perspective is brought to the table, especially in kind of bumpy waters like the last couple of years we've seen. The industry seems to be changing, and new perspectives are always welcome.
Yeah. No non-alcoholic wines coming out, right?
It's just a different business.
Yeah.
I'm glad that people are doing it, but we cannot do that to any of our fruit.
No, it's fine. No, I have that conversation a lot, and I have someone that I know that's always like, well, why aren't more wineries making non-alcoholic wine? I'm like, why do the wineries have to change? Like, I'm not trying to say like we shouldn't adapt, but it's also a totally different process. It requires different equipment. Like,
it really is.
It's not like I can just say like, I'm just going to bottle grape juice
and wave your wand and the alcohol disappears.
Yeah.
We would do that for sure.
Well, if it was that easy, wouldn't we all? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's different, but also similar to, I think, like cow's milk versus oat milk.
Sure.
They're comparable products in many ways, though some people will never be able to look past the differences. Yeah. And there's very different processes that bring both to the shelf.
Right. Yeah. One is milking a cow and one is literally nuts. Yeah.
Science.
Yeah. I think that, I think that you guys are changing really well, with the temperature and with the climate and everything changing the way that it is. It's great to see that the alcohol percentages have scaled down, right? This is the Fort Ross Seaview 21, 13.5% alcohol, and picking earlier and kind of like managing things the best way that you can. Do you feel like in your time with the winery and in your time managing the vineyards and calling picks, is it still kind of like every vintage is a little bit different, or do you feel like there's maybe a trajectory of it just getting warmer and warmer?
Time will tell. I mean, being a coastal region, maritime, we have more of a buffer than continental climates for sure. So we're lucky in that sense. And there's going to be a degree in which farming tweaks make up for any small differences that we see in the short term. We're certainly not, a lot of news cycles have gone like, can we grow Cabernet in Napa anymore? We're not looking to radically change what we grow where. We think that grapes are more resilient than they're given credit for. That's part of, the mystique of terroir is everything has to be perfect, and if it's tweaked at all, it falls apart. I don't know that that's 100% true. I think that with changing tastes, especially in the new world, small changes in temperature over time are going to be okay. I mean, primary indicator that a crop is all right is if quality is there and the fruit is intact when you bring it into the winery. And as long as it tastes good once it's in bottle, that's what we're really paying attention to. As far as, lower alcohols, it's partly a vintage thing. Brix does not correlate perfectly to straight sugar content. Okay. So there's, we might pick, even if we were to pick at identical Brix 3 years in a row, we're going to end up with 3 different alcohols. And we don't know in advance. That's why we use a lot of a gut instinct and best guesswork to do what we can. And if there's a crazy heat spike and a grower is not able to pick on the day we want, then, one vineyard might get a little bump, and that's natural too, right?
Yeah. When I guess, if something doesn't kind of show quite as well as you want it to, it's not that like you're going to put a lesser product in the Russian River or the Fort Ross Seaview, but like in the Russian River, you're able to kind of like mix it in with stuff it's not like it's one site specifically that it got a little warm. It's not, I don't want to say that it's getting homogenized, but it's getting kind of mixed in, and you're able to use the seasoning the right way as if you're cooking, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Vineyards can correct for earlier vineyards. But, even single vineyards, if, I wanted to pick Monday and I have to pick Tuesday, part of what Burgundy has thrived on is vintage variation. And these vineyards aren't single vineyards on a whim, they're great sites and they can handle more than others, which makes them worth designating.
Yeah, I think that's really well said too, is, I don't know where we, not necessarily where we went wrong, but where we kind of went down that path of like the same wine vintage after vintage for American wines, but not necessarily for old world wines, right?
Yeah, it's a double standard that drives us absolutely nuts. And that was part of what drove our use of New Oak down as well. I mean, the Grand Crus absolutely inspired Dad. He was not trying to imitate them, but the notion that grapefruit can handle more oak is absolutely true. The caveat, however, is that it needs more time to integrate.
Right.
And a lot of old world producers are afforded that time, both, in written reviews and just general mentality. But whatever we did in California, we seem to think like, oh, this is the way it's drinking right now, therefore you're an oaky wine, and there you go. We don't get to say, oh, you should drink it after 10 years,
Right.
So we're just like tweaking a little bit based on the reality in which we sell.
Well, I think that's the best that you can do is, again, being dynamic and adapting to the ebb and flow.
Yeah.
Let's see, we touched on a lot of the things, I guess, too. You mentioned that you call picks and would you mind elaborating kind of on the roles between you and Alan, and if your dad still is like in charge of particular thing, or kind of like maybe, where everything lies as best as you can, as we discussed before the podcast. That's obviously not perfect.
It's a little complicated on the ground. So Alan and I are co-presidents, and as that title indicates, we do spend a good chunk of our time thinking about medium and longish term, big picture stuff. We're regularly involved with, tasting production wine. We follow every lot every 2 weeks. We're making sure that all departments is a strong word, but all components of the company are working together toward the same goal instead of self-siloing and losing communication and not marching toward the same priority set. Alan, since he did get his MBA from Cambridge, to his chagrin, I think has thought a little bit more about finances. He tries not to go in that direction too much,
Sure.
but it's just a practical thing, you know. And I, you know, my training happened in the vineyard, so that is what I've inherited. But we really do feel it's important to overlap in most things. For, you know, when one of us is not around, we can cover
Step
for each
in.
other.
Yeah.
And two heads really is better than one, especially on things that we disagree on. We have a relationship where we can pretty vehemently disagree and find common ground, and I think our decisions are much stronger for that process, because we have to examine and re-examine everything we do. And Dad is chairman of the board of our, you know, very large board.
Yeah.
You know, you could also think of him as winemaker emeritus.
Sure.
He did tell a wine writer just a couple days ago that he was retired, but, you know, retired when you've built a business from the ground up is never really retired.
Never really retired.
He will always care about this company until his dying breath.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I went to Hendry, and, you know, the dad is, you know, just like walking the vineyards, and he's like walking with the dog, and we were there tasting, and they go, "Oh, that's the father," and we go, "Oh yeah, how old is he?" And she's like, "I think he's like 87," and we're like, "Holy shit, he's just walking the vineyards, running with the dog, throwing a ball, and just out there."
Keeps you healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, being outside and staying active mentally and physically. I mean, we work with a lot of old growers in their 80s, and it's like, I need to do everything that you've done for your whole life because you are in fantastic shape.
Yeah. It's like, I can't remember the Japanese term, but there's a Japanese term that has to do with like, it's not ikigai, it's something like that, but it's like finding your sense and doing something that like keeps you mobile. Yeah.
Yep.
What do you think Ramey looks like in 10 years and 20 years? I mean, what do you think
20 years, I don't know that I can
Sure.
even hazard a guess. Alan and I will still be involved. I can tell you that much. 10 years, you know, whatever market conditions are, we hope that it's clearer in 10 years.
Yeah.
As we finish up our replants, we hope to be, you know, not self-sufficient on the red side, but quite self-sufficient on the Russian River Chardonnay side, which is our largest, most important product. So that would be nice. And yeah, I mean, we feel a lot of tensions right now, so we just try to pay attention and think about what direction we should be moving in.
Yeah.
But stability is definitely our guiding principle at this time.
That's good. I think finding that peace and also, like you mentioned, you know, being outside and kind of finding that happiness is really important, especially in the last, you know, year and a half with the market being the way that it's been. It's like, you've got to control the controllable. I mean, yes, we can adapt, and yes, we can tweak things, and yes, we can like try to do some things, but if we just drive ourselves crazy with like trying to control everything, it's not a healthy mindset.
Yeah. And we're hoping that I don't know, we'll just call it the anti-alcohol movement for lack of a better term. I hope that reaches a similar kind of endpoint in a few years where people realize I can't micromanage every aspect of my health. And, you know, some trade-offs are not worth making, and not every good is quantifiable. I mean, we all do things that are bad for us every day. We get in cars.
The sunlight is poisonous.
Sunlight, yes. We breathe air full of pollutants, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we could wear gas masks every day, which would be healthier possibly. But again, that trade-off, is it worth it? is it a net positive on our lives? I'd like to think a little bit more holistically than that.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I haven't talked about in a long time on the podcast, and I'll just say it again. It's like, for me, like it's this like backswing of this like overconsumption that happened during the pandemic, and
there's that too.
This bad relationship with alcohol that people formed, and
yeah,
you know, the non-drinking is like, oh, I'm not drinking because I don't want to feel like shit, and it's like, you don't have to drink a lot.
Gray area
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't have to drink 12 White Claws. Like you can have a drink, and with a bottle of wine, it's like, it's meant to be shared. You don't have to drink the whole bottle in a night.
No,
right?
Shared, or we'd encourage you to buy a bottle that is going to be good for a week if you recork it and leave it on your counter. And then you can enjoy a small glass a day and get to know a wine over, an evolution.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, I had Scott Stewart was my manager, and, he would say that he would be drinking some of the Barolos on like the third and fourth day just to kind of like see how they're evolving. And that's cool. And, not everybody can afford a Corvin, but there's Corvins and there's, half bottles, and there's these pumps, and there's even just the argon spray you can spray into the top of the bottle.
Yeah,
and
or just stick it in your fridge.
Yeah, or stick it in your
really
fridge.
Slows things down.
Yeah. That was a lot of restaurants that I've worked, that's something I implemented. The Reds go in the fridge at the end of the night.
Yeah.
If you have too many Reds by the glass, or at least the expensive stuff.
And a lot of people serve Reds a little too warm anyway.
That's true. Yeah. Coming out a little bit of a chill on it is not that bad.
I like it.
Yeah. Speaking of what you like, obviously I'm sure that you only drink Ramey Wines. But if you were to be drinking anything else, what is there anything in particular that's captured your attention lately, or do you have like a favorite style or something that you generally gravitate towards?
I go through cycles like most people, I think. I must say I rarely drink our wines at home because we drink them at work, and I don't want it to feel like work at home. Yeah. You tend to micromanage things or analyze things that you're too familiar with. Much to the chagrin of my husband, is like, why do we never open our wine? I'm like, well, I had it today. I'm currently still in an Austrian Gruner phase. Cool. It just makes me happy. A little bit of a counter cool kid statement, but I love a good Tavel Rosé. Yeah. Makes me happy. Drinks with a wide variety of foods, which is usually what I have in my fridge. So user friendly. I was in a red kick a few years ago, but I seem to be swinging into more whites. I mean, I'll never say no to an interesting Italian white or red. I mean, really most things I'm pretty open to. And even things I don't want to drink, I will happily drink anyway, because it's our job to know wine from around the world.
I think it's so important too to be open-minded about it. Some people will say like, oh, I don't drink that or whatever, and I mean, my first job was at Glazer's, and I used to sell barefoot. And I was a small beach town, Galveston, Texas, and I sold a lot of barefoot, and also, my grandma is 86, 87, and she drinks barefoot. She puts a little ice in it, and like,
awesome.
Whatever, just like, as long as people are enjoying it, that's my thing, is like, if you enjoy it, that's important. But if you want to learn more and you want to branch out and you want to step into the unknown, like, that's where it gets really cool, and you can start supporting smaller producers and supporting family-owned and operated wineries. And
it's been said before, but the only job wine has is to be enjoyed. That's literally the only reason to drink wine, right?
I think
for it to make your life better, whether it's through cultural enrichment or appreciation of food or anything. And even if you like a wine because it's interesting and makes you think, as long as you enjoy that, that's okay. So I will never scoff at whatever anyone, if you want to buy a DRC and put ice in it and that makes you happy, go for it. It's your money, it's your time.
I will say the only one that I ever get like really like upset about is just the Meiomi Light. Have you seen this?
No.
Oh yeah,
light?
It's light sugar and light alcohol. It's like 7%. It's light sugar, so it's like 18 grams per liter. You know, it's
Okay.
very
And
light.
yeah, if you're drinking a glass, that probably cuts down to like a handful of grams, which
Yeah.
is still well under a Pepsi,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah.
I think that's like 40 grams in
I think
a
it's
can.
40 grams in a can, yeah. Or 38 or something,
Yeah.
somewhere around there, yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I've been living under a rock, clearly.
Oh, yeah.
I'll have to keep my eyes peeled.
Got to go to
for that
Target more,
product.
you know, that's all.
Yeah, I don't get to Target very often.
With, you know, having to be so hands-on in the winery and the vineyards, do you get to travel much? Do you get to go to other wine growing regions?
A little bit. You know, as I said, Alan enjoys traveling, so I let him sometimes take more of those trips. Though tiring, you know, travel is travel and it is tiring. Yeah. There are some times of year it's just hard for me to leave. We will both be in Germany for Provine in March. We need to get in touch with what's going on in the international stage. But he's going on to the UK and Denmark, and I will be probably coming home because, again, we don't all have to do everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, it's every other year, I'd say, get somewhere international, but somebody still has to keep an eye on things at home.
Busy. Let's see, what else? I guess, do you have any advice, any words of wisdom? Is there anything that you want to say to listeners?
In a nutshell, that's tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, I would.
It doesn't have to be in a nutshell.
Yeah.
You could list them out. You could elaborate as much as you want. I'm here. We have more wine. I'm good.
Encourage people to be open-minded, as boring as that may sound, but it really is radical to be truly open-minded when it comes to such a deeply entrenched cultural field like wine. You know, both to alternative food and wine pairings and to, you know, maybe you haven't tried an Ohio wine recently, but once California was scoffed at a similar level. And everyone is trying really hard and deserves to be given a shot.
Yeah.
And if you never challenge yourself, then you'll never be surprised or, you know, maybe strike up an interesting conversation and learn a thing or two. I would love for people to bring a little bit more of an experimental mentality, radical experimentalism to what they drink.
That's awesome. No, I think that's really well said. And it's kind of like part of that journey of self-development. You know, if you're not out there testing yourself, then you're not going to grow.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of person would you be if, like, oh, I don't like to meet other people, I just like to talk to the people that I already know?
Yeah, I like my echo chamber and I don't want anything else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And spice it up a little bit.
Right. Why not?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, anything else you want to talk about? Anything else you want to cover?
I'll probably think of something really awesome as I'm driving home, but
this whole thing was really awesome.
Phone it in.
I feel bad. I was just like hammering you with questions, but I was just like, you know, you made the drive down here. I want to try to get as much info out of you as I can, and
that's why we're
gonna
here.
make the drive back. So I'm very, very grateful for your time, and
thank you for asking.
This is so cool, and I'm, you know, excited about the wines. I always have been, and yeah, I've got a couple bottles of Syrah in the cellar that they're gonna be there for a long time.
Awesome.
And I'm really excited about. Hopefully, you and I can get together in 10 years and share one of them.
I would love to do that.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks, Claire. I appreciate you.
Cheers, Christopher.
Cheers.
Thanks.